The internet loves to stir up fear around hidden dangers in our everyday habits. It is guaranteed clickbait. Now, often there are even a few kernels of truth in there, but they've been swaddled in layer after layer of false logic, incorrect assumptions, and misinterpretation. And today I have a sterling example of all of the above, and it's about coffee. Let's sort fact from fiction, shall we? Welcome to the Nutrition Diva podcast, a show where we take a closer look at nutrition news, research, and trends so that you can feel more confident about what you eat. I'm your host, Monica Reinagel, and today's episode was prompted by an article I recently came across in a major media outlet. It was one of those listicle pieces that the internet finds so irresistible. It was 6 drinks you should never have on an empty stomach. And the first one on that list was coffee. A bunch of experts were quoted for the piece, but many of the statements were either misquoted, misleading, or just plain inaccurate. So naturally, I leapt right into myth-busting mode, but before I go on, I need to come clean with you. The first thing I do every morning when I wake up is make a cup of coffee, which I drink black on an empty stomach. Sometimes I have 2. And then I often go to the gym and don't eat breakfast until mid-morning. So obviously, I do have a dog in this fight. However, I'm also committed to providing you with the most accurate information I can. So recognizing that I might be subject to a little confirmation bias, I took a little extra time to fact-check myself on this one, and you'll find some of the scientific references that I consulted in the show notes. I'm happy to say that those of us that like to start the day with a cup of coffee can probably continue to do so without any concern. And if someone you love is trying to tell you that your morning joe is shredding your stomach, allow me to offer you some fact-based counterarguments. So let's start with the claim that coffee is hard on your stomach because it's so acidic. One of the experts quoted in this piece started by pointing out that, quote, since coffee contains chlorogenic acids, it's highly acidic, which irritates the stomach lining. Now that sounds perfectly reasonable, doesn't it? Chlorogenic acid has the word acid right there in the name, after all. However, just because a food contains an organic acid, that doesn't mean that it is very acidic. In reality, brewed black coffee is only mildly acidic. On average, it has a pH of about 5. And to put that in perspective, that is about the same pH as a squash. Even the most acidic coffees only drop down to a pH of around 4.7, which is roughly the same acidity as a banana. We are hardly talking about battery acid here. Although coffee itself is not super acidic, it is true that the chlorogenic acids and the caffeine that it contains stimulate the cells in your stomach to secrete gastric acid, also known as stomach acid. And stomach acid is a whole lot more acidic than coffee. But this is still not necessarily a problem for most people. The stomach is a very acidic environment by design. That acid plays a critical role in digestion, and the stomach is lined with special cells that protect it from that acidic environment. Now, coffee can be a trigger for some people who suffer from acid reflux or GERD. And as I've talked about in previous episodes, the dietary triggers for reflux are not universal. They really do vary from person to person. But if coffee is a reflux trigger for you, that's likely to happen whether or not you have any food in your stomach. In fact, having too much food in your stomach may actually make reflux more likely because it exerts upward pressure on the lower esophageal sphincter. That's the muscle at the very top of the stomach that is supposed to prevent acid from reversing or refluxing into the esophagus. But the point I really want to make here is that drinking coffee on an empty stomach generally does not cause stomach irritation. If it's not causing you any discomfort, you probably do not need to worry about it. Another misleading statement that I wanted to address is that coffee can increase gastric motility, which, according to one of these experts, can irritate the stomach lining. Now, let's break that down into two parts because one part is true and the other is not. It is absolutely true that coffee increases gastrointestinal motility, or the speed at which things move through your digestive system. And this is often a welcome effect, if you know what I mean. Studies show that caffeinated coffee can significantly increase colonic motor activity. To put that in plain English, coffee often makes you poop. But this does not irritate the lining of your stomach. That increased motility is happening mainly in the colon, not the stomach. There's no evidence that connects increased gut motility to gastritis or an irritated stomach lining. So yes, coffee speeds things up, but no, that is not a sign of irritation or injury to the lining of your stomach, or your colon, for that matter. The article also claimed that having coffee on an empty stomach can lead to anxiety, jitters, shakiness, or a faster heart rate. And again, I think they are linking together some unrelated things. Caffeine is a central nervous system stimulant. It makes us feel more alert. However, if you are very sensitive to caffeine, or you just have way too much of it, that central nervous system stimulation can cause a pounding heart, jitters, shakiness, or anxiety. But this is only minimally impacted by whether or not your stomach is empty. Having some food in your stomach may delay or blunt the delivery of caffeine into your bloodstream, but how much caffeine you take in and your individual sensitivity to it are much bigger players. In other words, if you are highly sensitive to caffeine, you will likely experience those jitters whether you drink it with food or without. You're probably better off avoiding caffeine altogether. And finally, let's talk about one expert's suggestion that adding milk to your coffee will lower the acidity, making it gentler on your stomach. Milk does not lower the acidity of coffee as much as you might think. The pH of milk is only slightly higher, that is, less acidic, than that of black coffee. And more importantly, as we've already talked about, the acidity of the beverage isn't really the problem. That said, adding milk to your coffee may still help, but for a completely different reason than the one that they've suggested here. The proteins in milk can bind to the chlorogenic acids and other polyphenols in the coffee, and that makes those compounds less absorbable, which may reduce their ability to stimulate that gastric acid secretion. Now, you may have caught that I just said that milk proteins bind to other polyphenols as well. And aren't polyphenols generally a good thing? Good catch. Yes, polyphenols are a broad class of plant-based antioxidants, which are responsible for many of the benefits we get from eating fruits and vegetables, and from drinking coffee. This is probably a good place to mention one of my favorite little pieces of trivia, which is that coffee is actually the #1 source of antioxidants in the typical American diet. So, does that mean that adding milk to your coffee might not only reduce gastric acid secretion, but also reduce its antioxidant potential? Well, yes, but also no. Milk can reduce the absorption of some of those polyphenols. On the other hand, the milk itself adds some antioxidants, and it may also protect some of the polyphenols in coffee from breaking down. The bottom line is that even with milk, or with a plant-based milk, coffee remains an antioxidant-rich drink. Whether or not you like milk in your coffee, you can reduce the chlorogenic acid content by choosing a darker roast. And yes, you heard me correctly. Roasting reduces the chlorogenic acid content of coffee beans, and it also creates a compound called NMP, which actively suppresses gastric acid secretion. So the longer the coffee is roasted, the less chlorogenic acid and the more NMP it contains. So if your stomach is sensitive, a dark roast is potentially more stomach-friendly, even though it might taste stronger. Choosing a cold brew can also help because when we brew with cold water, it extracts less of the chlorogenic acid, also less of the caffeine from the beans. Less extraction means you're taking in less of the compounds that stimulate gastric acid secretion. But to get back to the main question here, the evidence really does not support the claim that you should never drink coffee on an empty stomach. If it's not causing you any discomfort, there is no reason to think that it is harming you. If you have a question you'd like me to answer, or a claim that you'd like me to fact check, you can email me at nutrition@quickanddirtytips.com. And if you'd like to find out more about having me speak at your next live or virtual event, you can find more information about that at wellnessworkshere.com. Nutrition Diva is a Quick and Dirty Tips podcast. Holly Hutchings is our director of podcasts. Steve Riekeberg is our audio engineer. Morgan Christensen heads up podcast operations and advertising. Rebecca Sebastian is our manager of marketing and publicity. And Nat Hoops is our marketing and operations assistant. My thanks to all of them, but most of all, thanks to you for listening.